Hey everybody, Raul here for Bass Musician Magazine, and today we have the extraordinary honor and pleasure of chatting with bassist for Basic Elements, William Preston Bowling. Yay! So Bill, there's so much interesting stuff to talk about. It's a real story around your band and all that, but as always, we like to go to the very beginning in the past. How did you get started in music and particularly on bass?
I think Duran Duran was probably the band that got me into it. I mean, well, before that, I was a huge Pink Floyd fan, and Roger Waters was a big influence on me. And then as I started, to get into the whole new wave thing, I discovered, another bass player, John Taylor, Duran Duran, and I just loved the bass licks that he had because a lot of the bass at the time was kind of boring and just like do 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 do, but then all of the John Taylor licks were do 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 do, so it was interesting for me to play.
Gotcha. And are you self-taught or did you pursue further studies?
Well, it's funny because John Goldman, he's the keyboard player in Basic Elements, and we formed the band Basic Elements, and we had the same music teacher growing up. We're 14, 15 years old, and we would go to a music class in Scottsdale, Arizona, in the back of a music store. And so we were kind of trained like that. And by the time we kind of surpassed her, we just kind of stopped taking lessons.
Gotcha.
But I think, I initially started on violin and then cello, and then when I was a kid, so I kind of always went to the 4-string instrument. I'm not one of the, if you want to say, lazy guitar player, but so I don't play with a pick. So I've always done the 4-string instrument for my entire life.
Gotcha. Well, and it sounds like if you played those other instruments, you had at least a musical foundation as well, kind of to draw upon. So you weren't walking into it, blindly.
Yeah, and these were elementary school classes that, you had to take like a music class back then, which was great. I don't think they do that anymore, but I did saxophone also with my elementary school. So it was all school-based stuff.
Well, it was when they were particularly recognizing the value of music and arts in education, where it's not that they were training an army of musicians, but it had beneficial effects on other parts of brain development and academics and things like that. So if nothing else, it made people a little more well-rounded with, if nothing else, with an appreciation. So Basic Elements, how did that come about?
Well, again, it goes back to the Duran Duran thing. I got to credit Duran Duran for everything. John Goldman and I, the keyboardist, were big Duran Duran fans, and, the whole new wave thing. It was interesting because MTV was there, and we were in Phoenix, Arizona, so it wasn't like LA or New York. It wasn't anything cool, if you will, and we were just getting these images fed to us, mostly of like from England and Europe, and all these guys, wandering around with their new romantic fashions, and we're like, oh my God, that's cool, and we just kind of wanted to get away from the board shorts and tank tops of Arizona. It was just something that was so new to us and really interesting. And it was like bringing us to another part of the world. We were like traveling without really traveling. And then, that was it.
Gotcha. And so then you recruited more members at school, or?
Yeah, so we started the band before we really knew how to play. And we got a couple of people that didn't know how to play, and our drummer didn't even own a drum set. He was playing on pots and pans and everything, and so we were kids. Like, we started this band in our teens.
Mm-hmm. It is always kind of interesting in some of those origins. It's part of the I have a will to do this, and so I remember with the Beatles came out in the 60s, and I was, my friend and I, we were planning to build our own guitars because that seemed like the thing to do. It's like, if I could just get, a big enough box and a stick and some strings, I could make my own guitar and play like the Beatles, So those external influences are pretty classic. So then you guys had a pretty good run once you got up and running. I think it was for about 6 years or so.
Yeah, well, interesting enough, we were kids. This was way before we were 18 years old, way before we were old enough to drink. And somehow all of our instruments just took to us. I don't want to call us, child prodigies or anything, but we all, did pretty well. And we wrote really good pop songs when we were 16 years old. And it took from high school talent shows, people word of mouth, because Phoenix was a small town back then. And word of mouth say, hey, play here, play here. And a lot of older musicians kind of took to us like under their wing. One of them was IRS recording artist Caterwall. They were a big influence on us. They were one of the local bands, and Gentlemen After Dark, Gentlemen After Dark are on the Stranger Things soundtrack, believe it or not. So wow. A lot of this 80s stuff is coming back. So these older bands were like, hey, play with us. Because they were wild about these 16-year-old kids actually playing their instruments. And a lot of the songs that we wrote when we were 16, we re-recorded today, or 2019, with Ed Buller.
Nice. Well, and that is kind of the interesting thing. As I was watching the videos, there is either a time warp or a time capsule, because you're seeing both ends of that time expanse, where there's the footage of you guys when you were the teenagers, and now there's the footage of you at present date, and the songs are blended, so it's the same song, so it goes like, oh, wow, that just transcended. Now, for a lot of people, interestingly enough, I guess, we embrace the music that's happening around us when we're growing up. And I think it's not unusual for people of different generations to kind of poo-poo either the generation before or the generation after. So you hear a lot of 60s people going, oh, that 70s music was terrible. And then when the 70s came along and then the 80s showed up, and so much went to MTV and it was a visual experience, and they're like, well, no, that's not music anymore. But there's so much meat on the bones of that. So it is pretty, I'm going to say it is quite a choice to kind of grasp that particular sound and now bring it fast forward almost, 35 years?
Yeah, oh my gosh, yeah.
That is so wild. So one of the things that we should ask is, we always like to find out how you get your sound. And I know that back in my day, it was whatever I could get in my hands. But now, and all of you have gone on to do careers in between, in this gap, so you might have a better choice of what you want to play on and all that. How did you get your sound then, and how do you get your sound now?
Well, I'm going to go in reverse. I'm so nothing now. I just plug in, and I just love my sound of my Ampeg SVT, so I could just plug in and I love it. So I don't do anything. But back then I was trying to emulate all my heroes and everything. So I had the little Boss chorus pedal and the Boss flanger, and then I had the octave pedal, of course. Yeah. So I had those 3 Boss pedals, and those were the sounds of the time. And as I got older, I'm like, I don't need to, emulate anyone. I'm my own person, and I like a bass sounding like a bass. Like, why do I need to make it sound like a freaking guitar? Sure.
Now, I can't help but to notice the Fenders behind you. Have you always been a Fender player?
It's funny. My first Fender that I ever got was during our reunion show 35 years later.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so of course, when I first started out, I talked earlier, John Goldman and I, with Evelyn Johnson, our music teacher, in the back of the music store in Scottsdale, Arizona. We didn't have our instruments yet. John had a little tiny Casio PT-30 electronic musical instrument before he got the Juno 60. And so I didn't even own a bass guitar, so Evelyn would rent me her bass, and then I eventually bought it. It was like a no-name bass for like $150. And then I was a dishwasher at the Point Resorts in Arizona when I was like 14, 15, 16. You can get jobs before you're 18 back then. And I saved up enough money to buy John Taylor's bass from Duran Duran.
Oh, wow.
So he was playing back then the Aria Pro 2. So I don't know if you remember those basses, but anyway, it was the exact John Taylor Duran Duran bass. So it was a $2,000 bass I saved up for back when I was a kid. That was a lot of money for a kid. And so I played the Aria Pro 2 for years with basic elements. And then when we got back together, we did the 35-year reunion show at the Mint, and we kind of got some press about that. And then Ed Bowler, who was in the Psychedelic Furs, and he produced Suede and Pulp, he was friends with John Goldman. They did some musical collaborations for a television show John was working on. John produces television shows. And he's like, hey, those songs you wrote when you were 16 are good. We should re-record those. And then I was in a surf band for 20 years playing Dan Electro basses, very surfy sounds. And then I went into the studio with Ed Bowler, and he's like, those basses sound like shit, mate. And I'm like, okay, well, what do you want to hear? And he's like, you got to get a Fender. And coincidentally enough, I had a connection at Fender, and I'm like, we're doing this show at the Mint, what if you loaned us some Fender gear? And so I became, at that point, Fender was kind of interested because they're like, hey, they're going to play the Mint. They're in Los Angeles. They got Ed Bowler. They're going to, highlight Fender guitars. And this kid's never played a Fender before. And so they ended up selecting me as a Fender artist. And we were able to get Fender bass and stuff like that from that.
Nice. Now, what I saw was a Jaguar, which isn't kind of the usual Fender fare.
Yeah, so the Jaguar bass was actually the Basic Elements bass that we did in 2019. So that was, the Basic Elements bass that they gave us.
Very nice.
Then we did another Basic Elements thing, and then they gave us the 75th anniversary bass over there. So
nice. And do you have a particular preference in strings?
Well, I use the GHS bass boomers. Mm-hmm. And medium long scale plus, like 45 to 105s. And that's kind of, I've been using that for years, and I like them because they could do the very active slapping stuff, and then they could sound really warm at the same time. So they have both of that feel to it. But when I was a kid, it was all about the look, and I was using like black strings, to match my black Aria Pro 2. So I was like, being really stupid. I didn't care about the sound. It was like all about the look. Oh, black strings on a black bass,
Yeah, that'll look cool.
Yeah.
Well, even I know how important the look seemed, especially at the time, because in the 70s, I was actually playing guitar with a band, and I had a no-name guitar. It was, I think, Sears had managed to kind of contract out a lot of companies to build instruments and then slap their name on it. So they were
like Silvertone,
Harmony, a lot of these kind of like, oh gee, that's odd. And so for a particular talent show, it was about 5th grade, I decided to mod it using a discontinued toy for children. It was Lightning Bug Glow Juice that Mattel had put out. And
that's a great band name.
Yeah, I know. Well, the thing was, this stuff is like radioactive. And so there's a reason they stopped producing it, because it fluoresces. So it absorbs light, then it lets on. It looks cool. But if you run a Geiger counter over it, all the fluorescent stuff just goes...
Radium or something.
I know. So it was kind of like, before we knew that stuff was bad for us. But the reality check, it went great. I did the outline of my guitar, and I did the fret dots, and I did the headstock, and I thought, well, I put it under a lamp before the show, and we go out, we'll be on a dark stage, I'll look so cool. And we did our show, blah, blah, blah. The long and the short of it is, it ate the finish. Everywhere that I put it, it had a sunburst kind of finish. It just kind of melted down into nothing.
That might look cool. Yeah.
Well, back in the day, you didn't want your jeans to have holes in them. You didn't want your instrument to look like it had been, chemically invaded. So I got as far as stripping it and sanding it all down, and never got around to putting it back together. But that's a whole other thing. Now, you did keep playing, as you'd mentioned, surf bands and things. In the interim, kind of in between. So you've always been involved in music.
Yeah. When I graduated high school, I moved to Los Angeles and, got a job at Tower Records, which was interesting. So, I was in their art department because I was an artist too. So I did a lot of their in-store displays and got to go to a lot of shows for free and stuff like that. And got a lot of, met a lot of people there. And then I was wandering down the street and bumped into a guy that I knew in Phoenix, J.P. Blackman. He was in a rival band in Phoenix called Faces of Eve, rivaling Basic Elements. And he's like, hey, I need a bass player. I'm in this band. And I'm like, oh, okay. And that was about the time when it was 1990. And that was like when the Red Hot Chili Peppers were kind of taking off. And it was kind of like a Chili Peppers-esque band. And I'm like, okay, I'll do it. And it was a total departure from Basic Elements, Duran Duran. But then I ended up doing, that type of, slappy bass music for a while. And then I joined a surf band, and I was in a surf band for 20 years. Chum. Yeah.
The names of the bands of the past.
Yeah.
Well, that's very cool. And it's interesting also, every member of Basic Elements ended up pursuing a different career. And so there's always this turning point. Kind of what was the point where you guys said, okay, now we have to everybody go do your own thing, not knowing what's going to happen afterwards, obviously.
Well, I mean, I think the turning point was getting a real job. But with Basic Elements, it was weird because, we started music when we were, 14, 15, 16, because John Goldman is like the baby. He's the youngest. So when I say 14, 15, 16, he's like a year and a half younger than me or 2 years younger than me. And so we were playing music, and by the time we got to be like 18, 19, we were like burned out of, and we were kind of wanted to retire by then. And I think if we just would have went over that hump, we might have went somewhere. But it was like our guitar player, his parents were saying, you got to go to college, and then everyone else's parents are going, you got to move out of the house. So we were making all these decisions like to try and transition into adulthood. So we kind of pushed the music aside, and I probably wish we never would have. We might have gone somewhere because the songs still held up today as proof with Ed Buller re-recording them in 2019. Mm-hmm. We went into a real studio and recorded these songs without very much changes to them. And we released cassettes of these songs. So on one side of the cassette is the actual boombox recording from 1985, and then the other side is the Ed Buller recording. So you could see what they sounded like, and all the elements are there, the basic elements.
There we go.
It was interesting. And then, of course, when I had a kid, then I had to get a real estate job and start making money, and so that was, the transition. I think everybody is, they had to get a job for some reason or other, and the music kind of became a side job.
Gotcha. Well, and you do real estate. What do the other band members do?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier John Goldman, keyboard player, producer of television shows. All of those reality shows where they find snakes in the jungles and gold in the hills. Like he has his fingers in those type of shows.
Wow.
And then, our guitar player, Davey Seppi, we've all known each other since we were kids, and he's an attorney, and drummer, graphic artist, and singer is a fine artist, selling artwork. And
nice.
We all have these jobs that we do now, and we're all adulting.
Yeah. Well, and now that you all have kind of come together, because there was the beginning and then their hiatus and now this big burst with the reunion, what are the plans for the future?
Well, interestingly enough, Chris Applebaum, he's a music video director, and he won the MTV Music Television Video Vanguard Award or VMA Award, whatever he won, but he's a great music video director. He's directed Rihanna in recent times, and then all the way back to Better Than Ezra, in the older times. Mm-hmm. And he directed Stacey's Mom Has Got It Going On, that video.
Wow.
So he's a high-profile music director, and he does commercials. And with John Goldman being in television, they know each other from working together. And Chris Applebaum just directed our next release. So we're going to have a music video directed by Chris Applebaum released on Vimeo soon. Or Vimo. What is it called? Vivo. Yeah.
Yeah. There you go.
So on Vivo, we'll have a real director and a real music video. Like you've seen our other stuff where we, piece things together and edit some old footage with new footage, but this is our actual first music video by a real director. And it was kind of a family affair because Chris Applebaum's kids are in it, and then my kids are in it, John Goldman's kids are in it, and it's kind of a mockery of The Breakfast Club.
Okay.
So it starts out, our kids are in detention, and then they're running the halls, and the principal is chasing them down. But the twist is it's all females. All of our kids are girls. We can only produce girls for some reason.
There you go.
Yeah. So it's the twist on that. Chris Applebaum directing the all-female kids of The Breakfast Club, the offspring of the Basic Elements.
Very nice, very nice. And if people want to know more about that or stay on top, they go to basicelements.com?
Well, it's basicelementsmusic.com.
Basicelementsmusic.com. Good.
Yeah, and it has the whole archives on there, so you can see what we look like in the past and what we look like today, and then the whole story, and then all of our videos. And it's pretty fun to go back and look at this, through time and see how we changed.
Yeah.
And a lot of the Ed Bowler music is on there too, and so you can hear the newly recorded stuff, and it's fun.
Nice. And then you have presence on pretty much all the social media stuff, Facebook, Instagram. Again, Basic Elements Music is the way to look at it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's where everything is put together, and then you can get all the social media links from there and stuff like that. But we have all the YouTubes and the Facebooks and all of that stuff. And also we're on Apple Music, Spotify, all that stuff. So it's all legit because we're adults now and we know how to do it. Back then it was like we did a few studio recordings and we had to save up, thousands of dollars to do this. And then we only did like maybe one song at a time back then. And they're somewhere floating around on like 2-inch tape. And maybe one day we'll go through and remix those.
There you go. Well, William, we appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to share this story. It's very fascinating, Basic Elements then and now, and looking ahead to the future, what will be coming forth, the new video and all that. Folks, you've seen him here, William Preston Bowling on Bass Musician Magazine.